Hi, everyone. I am Deaconess Jonna Georgia with Wisconsin Council of Churches, and I am pleased today to help host Building the Bridge to Communities, Flipping the Script on Outreach with Cody Nielsen. To introduce myself first, I was pinged to help host this webinar today because I am the program director for Awaken Dane. Awaken Dane was a 5-year program run in Dane County, funded by Lilly Endowment in partnership with Collaboration Project, University of Dubuque Theological Seminary, and Upper House Madison. And the main premise of Awaken Dane is that the Spirit of God is alive and at work in your neighborhood, whether you're involved or not. And Christians have this sort of bad habit of telling people what they need and doing it for them. And so we really worked with the churches that went through our cohort program to shift our mentality from doing for other people to being with, the power of being with, the ministry of presence, um, acknowledging that doing for others is important work and it does need to happen, but that we often undervalue being with each other. And we did some deep spiritual exercises to train ourselves to be better active listeners, to listen for the Spirit of God through Scripture, and listen for the Spirit of God in and among our neighbors so that we can see where the Spirit is at work in our neighborhood and then engage in that holy work instead of making assumptions and doing what we think we should be doing kind of willy nilly. Um, we are pleased to receive some continuation funding, and we'll be doing an Awaken Dane style project in Beloit in 2026. And then we'll be on to some other unknown yet to us city in Wisconsin in 2028 and in 2030. So um, if you're ever interested in learning more specifically about Awaken Dane, feel free to reach out to me, Georgia at wychurches.org. But for now, I want to turn it over to Cody to introduce himself and to launch us into this webinar.
Great. I am really excited to be here with you all this morning or wherever you are, whenever you get this recording, if you will. My name is Cody Nielsen. I use he and him and his pronouns. I'm coming to you this morning from Minneapolis, Minnesota, where winter has also arrived here in December. And I will not say that I am extremely excited, but here we are. We're Midwesterners prepared for an actual winter. I'm really excited to be with you all. I'm going to share a little bit more about myself here as we get started. I'm going to share my screen first. You're going to have the desktop, not the desktop. You are going to have the PowerPoint. That's going to be what you're going to find today. And I'm going to walk through and talk through this for a little while. And then when we're done, there's always an opportunity for conversation. And those of you on the webinar, I will have my contact information for you. So you've come to this session. So Jonna, thank you for the introduction, building the bridge to communities, flipping the script on outreach. A little bit more, as I shared, my name is Cody Nielsen. I use he and him and his pronouns. I'm founder and executive director of an organization called Convergence Strategies. So Convergence Strategies has been around since 2017. A lot of our work works on the role of religion in society. We do a lot of work, we do a lot of work on religious equity-based concerns. We do a lot of work with faith communities around helping them to prepare themselves to go out in the community and be better stewards of the work that they have been called and sent to do. I'm also an assistant professor of higher education at Western Michigan University in Kalamazoo, Michigan. I go back and forth between Minneapolis and Kalamazoo. And I like to say I'm a former campus minister and chaplain in the United Methodist Church, ordained elder in the United Methodist Church, and still have a deep love for helping to do this kind of work in community. So as we get started, that contact information right there that you have on your screen, maybe you take that screenshot, it'll come back up later. You also get the access to the slides when we're done and when you're viewing this webinar, but you're welcome to reach out to me at any time. That is my actual cell phone number on my actual phone that's right in front of me today. And that's my email address for you to reach out to. So I'm happy and excited to have a chance to connect with you. So a little bit about this session. So I often like to say, what if our churches did better outreach? What is the approach that, though, that wasn't about them coming to us, but rather us coming to them? What if we work together to build congregations with which fundamentally were embedded in our communities? And this is the session that explores how to build that bridge, if you will. So we're always here to take a deep breath. I always like to say, as we get started, it's nice to take one breath in and one breath out and sort of center ourselves and place ourselves in the space and the time. Those of you doing this in a webinar format, I'm going to pause for 10 seconds and I'm going to invite you to think about that and find that center. So here we are. Okay, so let's get started. So this will be a relatively brief, but attempt to be sort of as much of an overview of some of the lessons that I've learned as we sort of talk through this. And then again, it's always a chance for us to talk and have conversation afterward, as well as for those of you on the webinar format as you're watching this to reach out. So I want to tell you a story. So a long, long time ago, not in a galaxy far away, though I appreciate Star Wars for its reference, but a long time ago, in the fall of 2008, I moved to Washington, D.C. I had been born and raised in Southeast Iowa, went to college at the University of Northern Iowa, went through college and stayed 2 years on at my beloved campus ministry from when I was an undergrad and went on to be a ministry intern there for 2 years. That took me until the summer of 2008. And during that year, 2007, 2008 academic year, I decided that it was time to go off to seminary. And I ended up being able to land an opportunity to go to Wesley Theological Seminary in Washington, D.C. Part of that opportunity included a push by a colleague and friend of mine to this day who helped me land not only a scholarship, but an opportunity to do work as a campus minister or in a campus ministry type setting with the next door American University. So, Wesley Theological Seminary sits in a lot that was given up by American University. American University is one of the principal United Methodist colleges and universities, one of the 105, I believe, that there are in the country, but it was historically created by Bishop Oxnam in Northwest Washington, D.C. And right next door to that fair university is American University's next door United Methodist Church, known as National United Methodist Church. It's a giant church across the street. It looks a little bit like this. Big Gothic, built in the 1920s, kind of giant and towering over the southwest side of campus. And right across the street, a small two-lane street called Nebraska Avenue from American University. I landed a position there working with the university chaplain and the Methodist Protestant campus minister on campus, and I was the principal person coming out of this church. For years, the National United Methodist Church had been trying to do outreach with the students on campus, and on a rainy August night in 2008, I moved to Washington, D.C., and walked into my first church council meeting to meet with the advisory board for this newly developed position that I was hired into. And the first night, the staff of that the staff and the volunteers of that church said, "We have been trying to get students to come to us for 15 years, and we cannot get students to come to us." And I said, "When was the last time you crossed the street and went to them?" And they looked at me as though I had grown 5 heads. And I said, "The only way college students will come to you is if you go to them." And that was the beginning of a 3 year stint in Washington, D.C., in which we built a bridge across Nebraska Avenue. Why is this story important? Because, in my opinion, one of the things that has often plagued our faith communities has been an idea that the church is about holding in all of the efforts, all of the things that we believe, all the things that we do, and somehow you come to the church in order to experience them. And that so much of what we have built in terms of the ethos of our faith based communities across the United States has this idea that if we just build enough or do enough, people will come to us. And my response is I believe that the way in which to do effective outreach is for us to become the outreach and go into the communities, not for them to come to us. And again, some people may come, but the real work of the church, in my opinion, is in the community. With that in mind, I want to talk about a secondary issue and challenge that often comes up. So let's say we can agree our work needs to be extended out into the community. Well, then we have to look at a secondary issue. I call this the parking lot problem. So, oftentimes, one of the things that happens is that we go out into the community or we think about going into the community, and the first thing that we have to do is we have to get out the door. Clergy that are in our offices, we have to get out the door, and people that are coming from outside of our churches that don't sit there in terms of the day to day, you have to get out of your community. But eventually, we want to get you back, and we want to do work within and inside and outside of the congregation. Well, there's an issue, the parking lot problem. Here's the parking lot problem. Practically, the first thing that people see when they come or they pass by your church is your parking lot. They see what they see where they can park so that they can enter the building. They might be looking for the doors, but first, before they even get to the doors, they have to have a place to park their car if they're not walking. Urban churches, sometimes we don't have parking lots. Maybe that tells us something about who is supposed to come, but most of our churches have a parking lot. But the first thing that I'm going to tell you is that the first form of reputation that gets built is the detail that you have around your parking lot. If your parking lots are like this one right here, full of potholes, dilapidating, falling apart, what often happens is a form of limitation that tells you who is and is not going to be able to be a part of your community, who and who is not going to be able to show up in your space. So I often tell people that when they're doing interrogative looks around building community and flipping the script, the first place to go look is to ask yourself, what does the parking lot look like? If you want people to come to you, if you want to hold events, if you want to be a civic leader, you have to make sure that one of the first places that people gather or have a chance to gather from is a place that actually looks like it actually meets the moment. So, accessibility wise, potholes are problematic. Potholes are a reputation issue. So, yes, does it cost a lot of money to make sure that you keep your upkeep on your parking lot? It sure does. But the reality of the situation is that if people in a society, and as Midwesterners, and we know that driving is, for a lot of our congregations, the way in which people get to us, we have to make sure that our parking lots are up to date. And yes, that does not mean that we can neglect the other aspects of what's inside the building, but starting at the beginning, our parking lots are an important part. So I like to say, if you're doing a church renovation or if you're doing an interrogation around the community inside, you're going to start by looking directly outside. This is also important because as you walk out the door, as you take your congregation and move into the community, the first thing that you have to do is get through the parking lot. So at some point, no matter which way you're headed, bringing people into your congregation or moving outside of the congregation, the first things that you should look at are the bypass and the sort of like moment where you come inside and outside. So I invite you, if you are sitting especially on a webinar, that after you get done, go out and take a look. Or if you are already cringing because you know your church parking lot already needs upkeep, I invite you to go out and have that conversation about the impact of that. We'll return to the parking lot here in a little bit. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to view things from a sort of like negative image. And when I say negative image, I don't mean like we're going to look at the world negatively, but we're going to view things from a sort of inverse viewpoint as we move forward. One of the things that we think about, or things that I help congregations to think strategically about in terms of their outreach, is about flipping the idea that outreach is about them versus outreach is about you. So, what do we have to understand? We have to understand a few things. First, we have to understand what is the understanding the non-attending viewpoint. Um, we have a lot of folks who are no longer attending church. Sometimes we call them the nuns, the not particular religiously affiliated, but more importantly, we have folks that used to come and be a part of our congregations and communities and families and types of individuals, and they're no longer attending. We need to understand those viewpoints. So we're going to talk about those. Second, we're going to need to talk about what is the purpose of the church and the community. So sometimes we need to look at the inverse images, that the inverse viewpoints that the church and community has always said, well, our view is to make more Christians and to do discipleship. And my response is we need to talk about an inverse experience of that and what are other ways in which the church and community can be looked at. Third, we need to look at from an inverse perspective and say, is Sunday worship the only form of congregation? We have a bad tendency, or we've had a bad tendency in the church's past of looking at someone and saying, like, do you go to church? And that is the foreseeable identifier of one who identifies as Christian or one who identifies as being faithful, if you will. And we're going to take a look at that sort of like, what are the different forms of like Christian practice that don't require a congregational Sunday worship setting. We're going to talk about what do we do best, not what do we do the most of. So we'll talk a little bit about that and about maybe being a little bit more willing to accept the fact that every congregation can only do so much. And what is it that we do as a collective? And then we're going to talk about what our current standing and visibility is in the community. And then we'll talk about from that what that leaves us to do and what ways we can think about better outreach and better movement going forward. I notice our new person here. Good to see you there. Thank you for joining us. We are recording this session as well, but thanks for coming. Okay. So let's take a look at each of these one at a time. So first and foremost, the current trends and data have showed a number of things about the sort of non-attending member. We know that church attendance is down and very much at its lowest point on record in the United States. New data out of the Public Research Religion Institute shows that church attendance in the United States is at its lowest that we've had on record. There's a lot of contributing factors to that. The questions are, who are these folks? And maybe not so much how do we get them back, such as why are they not attending? So these individuals tend to be younger in generation. We sort of know that. As you get younger and younger generation, there are less folks that are attending church. less folks that are choosing to do this. As a former campus minister and chaplain, I have talked to many a colleague across the country who are experiencing declines in terms of collegiate practice of religion, especially Christianity. And the questions are why? Well, those folks tend to be the sort of non-attending members. They tend to have more progressive viewpoints on social issues, especially on LGBTQIA plus identities and the role of women in society. Those viewpoints have been identified as being lower in terms of those that are attending Christian churches. Now, why? Well, I think that we as a Christian church have a lot to account for in terms of our impacts on this community, on these communities, the role of this. We can have that conversation about what we should and should not be doing. And obviously, there are various viewpoints on this inside the Christian communities and churches right now. But just from a sort of like inverse viewpoint, the viewpoints are that many of these younger generational folks and those that hold progressive viewpoints on social issues, especially these two particular issues, have found that attending church has not been beneficial to them, and being a part of Christian congregations and communities have not been beneficial in their own lived experiences on this. As well, those that are the no longer attending member have tended to be more politically active. They're more likely to be single. So you may have heard that some of the lowest percentage individuals that are currently attending church include single young men, as well as independent and Democratic voters. And one thing that I think is really critical for us to realize is that for those that are attending and those that are congregational worshipers, particularly, there is an idea that occasional participation in church is also regular participation in church. So I'll give you the data on this. This is a sort of terrifying but real statistic that a lot of clergy that I have worked with have sort of had to hang on to, and that is that in 1997, 71% of individuals who identified as being Christian said that they were regular churchgoers. In 2017, the same percentage said that they were regular churchgoers. So in 1997, 71% of those that identified as Christian said that they were regular churchgoers. In 2017, 71% of Christians said that they were regular church attenders. Clergy and denominational leaders said that's not possible. Our numbers are significantly down from 1997 to 2017. And the results of that went back, that deeper investigation found that in 2017, what people meant was regular in 1997 meant once a week. In 2007, it meant once a month. So, by definition, the regular churchgoer is now a once a month, but now reforecasted as occasional church attendee. So we have a lot of work in terms of that outreach because we have a different future church. We have a church that isn't so much about attending worship on a Sunday morning. We have a different church who has more progressive viewpoints on social issues than perhaps we've had in terms of those that are not attending. We have younger generational folks that are no longer participating in the life of the church. And these are the individuals who are more politically active, more likely to be single, and tend to be independent or Democrat in their affiliation politically around social issues. So this is a sort of like perspective of the non-attending member. Well, now we get a chance to talk about the second based issue, and that is, what is the purpose of church and community? So I think sometimes as we've thought about outreach and what we hope people to believe or practice or do within the church, we have fallen back on ways in which we've imagined the church to be from previous generations. And that is the church is built on the idea of attending worship, about listening to sermons, about receiving communion. And the idea is that to be a faithful Christian, you have to or should be attending church on Sunday morning. The reality is that what we see by these declines in regular worship down to what we are defining now as occasional worship means that the church itself has to be made up of a number of different communities and congregations, and that there is an opportunity for us to overhaul the idea of what the church is. That to me is a lot more working on purpose. And to me, the purpose in terms of this is not so much about one but the other at the same time. We often like to sort of create this sort of hierarchy of what does it mean to really be a Christian, or what does it mean to really be a part of the life of the church. And what I often like to say is people play different roles and have different experiences that they're most excited about. A couple weeks ago, I was meeting with a colleague of mine here in St. Paul, who has a relatively large Presbyterian church in town, and we were talking about all of the different congregations, if you will, that he had. He has an after-school program. They have a park across the street that they have some relationship with the city around maintaining. They have a couple of after school programs, they have a youth ministry, and of course, they have their Sunday morning practices. And he said to me, he said, really, what we think about is we think about those as being each individual communities and congregations. But also, we think very heavily about all the ways in which we can utilize those to build out the work in the communities that we serve. So what do? We take the church outside of the building itself and we bring it into the community in order to help people to lean into an understanding of who we are and what is our sort of location that we have in the community itself. And I think that leads toward a sort of third piece and going back to the sort of is Sunday worship the only congregation? And that is the sort of conversation that I like to have with congregations about the going to church or being the church conversation. So congregations are changing the nature of what it means to be a participant in the life of this congregation, in that I often tell people, especially those that are in settings where you are in small communities, that there is an opportunity for you to be a center point for community needs. Maybe you're in a small rural town in Wisconsin that has experienced a lot of marginalization around social economic status. Maybe what you need to be is a place in which the city council meets with constituents as a way in which to talk about potential issues around funding or potential issues around people's taxes. That's a great opportunity. Maybe there are ways in which the church in itself becomes a place in which we have hard conversations around our immigrants. So obviously you may have heard some of the statements of our current president of the United States about what's going on here in Minnesota with our Somali neighbors, friends, colleagues, all of these folks. Um, the churches are some of the places where we can have some of the most important conversations around this. It doesn't necessarily mean that those individuals that come for a meeting, an organizing meeting, an assembly, just a level of creating of conversations and dialogue, that doesn't mean that they necessarily become members of the church, but it does, in my opinion, show that the congregation can open up the doors and say, you are participating in the life of this community, and we are participating in the life of our community that we're in. And that leads toward the second piece, the sort of aspect of going out into the community. Too much of this build it and they will come model, I think, has actually drained not only our resources, but also drained the sort of the leadership that we have. So many of our congregational members have an opportunity to serve and lead out in the community, for us to simply be the church in the community. And I think the opportunity is there for us to overhaul that. If our ultimate goal is to bring people into the life of the community, I think we might be missing some of the realities of what the church is supposed to be in the world. I think if we let go of that sort of hope and expectation, people might actually come into our doors because of the work that we do in our community, rather than because that was the aim and intention. So that means being out in the community, not only going out in the community, but essentially being out in the community, taking the ministries that we have, imagining the ministries and the programs and the resources that we have, and taking them out into the community for the betterment of the community, without a preamble and sort of expectation that people come back to us. I think one of the things right now, with the rise of what we have seen in terms of Christian supremacy and Christian nationalism, is all the more need for us to have real engagement with our communities, in order for people to see what we offer, and to be a sort of antithetical response to where a lot of folks have leaned in. So if your congregation is wanting to lean on the idea of pushing back on Christian nationalism and what we're seeing in our political and social climate right now, don't leave it inside the four walls. Absolutely think about how it can be taken out into the community, how we can have hard conversations as members of the congregation, but also as members of the community itself. And I think that leads toward a fourth thing: being careful about how to be the church and listen for the opportunities that are there. Sometimes I think we ourselves like to imagine inside our congregations what we can do best, what can we best offer um, to our communities, and best offer to the people that we're trying to serve. And my response often is, I wonder if we would do a lot more listening with members of our community, and then from that opportunity say, this is what we think people need. And again, it's not to get people to come back to us necessarily. I think people will come to us when they see the church being the church in the community. But we also can't have that as a sort of like expectation that if we do this, people will automatically come to us. Sometimes in this moment, it's just right to do what is right. So I have seen so many congregations that set up opportunities and support systems for folks around SNAP benefits when we were seeing the government shutdown. I think that's the kind of opportunity that is there. But it's also not just an opportunity when we have a crisis, but an opportunity right now in this moment in our society that we serve, to be out and about advocating and doing the work. So I'll give you an example. I have a background in social work. One of the biggest challenges that we often see during the winter is folks that are living paycheck to paycheck. When we get heating bills and heating issues come up, people will end up having to make hard choices. And sometimes they don't know where to receive services. And as a former social worker who worked for an organization that helped people to work with with electrical and heating company and gas companies to be able to reduce their bills. Maybe one of the things that you can do is to hear what's going on in the local community and then create a resource guide so that if someone walks in the door or when you are out and your congregation members are out in the community, maybe you have a resource guide if you come across folks that you might hear of that are struggling around this. Like, how do they get support for resources? Who do they call? Here's somebody right here. Listening for those opportunities and knowing what and how to respond can be really effective. It can actually also be quite a joy-filled experience to know that you are working with members of your congregation to equip them to be the church out in the community and have the tools and the resources with them. Training, equipping, going through that. There are many folks, I would imagine, in our congregations who would be more than interested in learning how they can support their neighbors and their community members out of their own compelling faith convictions, but perhaps just don't know what they need to know or have available in terms of resources. So again, this is about listening for opportunities and knowing that sometimes that means that we will go in directions that we haven't already pre-expected, but are the needs of people around us. And again, each individual community is different, but being the church is not about trying to prescript something. It's about responding to what is in front of us and to be strategic about that. So this leads toward a fourth piece, and that is the sort of question around being everything to everyone. So I'm going to say something somewhat controversial, but I do think it's important for us to sort of assess and analyze. A lot of congregations that I've worked with in the past sort of operate as though there's no other churches out there, there's no one else out there that could possibly be doing the kind of things that they do. And we get into this sort of headspace that we need to do this project and this project and this project. We need to have a food pantry, and we need to be doing a service project, and we need to be doing this in our community, and we need to be doing this in our community. And what I often say is eventually people are doing too much. And that is controversial because people are like, well, are we supposed to be the church? Shouldn't we be draining our resources? My response is yes. But when you spread yourself so thin, doing a little bit of everything, you're not necessarily great at anything. So, what I like to say is you're part of the collective. You are Baptist, you are Lutheran, you are Methodist, you're non, you're non-denominational, you're part of the Catholic community. I don't care. Cross the denominational lines and work across the Christian communities. Work across all faith communities. There might be a number of mosques or synagogues or a gurdwara or a temple. Like, work together to cross this, as well as be a part of the collective of the community at large and what's happening. Maybe your city hall has resources that are out there, but maybe what you need to be is about focusing on the gaps that are needed in the community and focusing and putting your energy on that. So, one of the things that I was very pleased about running when I was here as a active clergy in the Twin Cities is that we got to a point where we had a rotation of places where people could go for a daily meal. And we got to a point that we had about 15 congregations that were serving meals, and we could collectively give people resources that were struggling with food scarcity, a guide that within this like 5 to 6 mile radius, they could go any day of the week, Monday through Sunday, find lunch or dinner for free. And we collectively put that together. Now, again, things that are basic needs that may or may not be what you need. You may be working on refugee support services or immigration support services, and your congregation might be like perfect for that. And you might have that lean all the way in. And then when folks are like, well, what are we doing about like, serving our neighbors in terms of food or something like that, partner with other congregations and communities that have it best, that already are skilled at that. But I think being part of the collective is really, really critical instead of trying to do too much of everything, because what often happens is that people will do a little bit of everything, but things will eventually break down. They're built on the idea of one particular person driving the sort of mission around this. It has liability in that it can fall off because you don't have enough volunteers. All of those things can fall out just with one person leaving, or just with a sort of like time in which a group of people inside the community are getting busy. So I think slowing down. I think a third piece around being everything to everyone is actually about reflecting upon how to have difficult conversations across differences with each other. Some of you may have come or may have heard that I did a session a few weeks ago on the impacts around Christian nationalism and what's happening. I think one of the things that we have to do a better job of in our congregations is that we have to be able to have difficult conversations across difference. And I do not believe that that means that we need to not call out harm as they're done. But church shopping and just simply seeing people come and go is actually one of the things that I think is really breaking down our congregations. And what happens is that we become very insular. So I think the opportunity to open up our congregations to have difficult conversations across difference is really becoming important. And if we are going to be a community that flips the script and thinks about our outreach as being out in the community, I think it's time for us to think about how to have hard conversations with people, even those that maybe we fundamentally disagree with, at least to a level in which we are still providing safety for members of our community that hold some of those identities that may have caused harm. I think the fifth piece here, and this is where we're going to sort of move this forward and then sort of move toward a flipping the script moving forward. The sort of the things that I think we need to really interrogate around our current standing is the current attitudes regarding Christianity that are out there. We know we've seen the sort of rise of the conversation in the public limelight around Christian nationalism and that impact on our society. And I do think that's worth self-interrogation. But I think it's more important for us as well to also understand what people that are not a part of our congregations have to say about us. What are we what are we being told? What are others telling about us? And I think the opportunity for us to slow down, listen to those, and to take that in is really important, because we can't just keep saying, no, we're not, no, we haven't, those aren't our Christians, et cetera, et cetera. We are going to have to actually really interrogate that, because frankly, some of our outreach needs to be about an outreach of reconciliation around Christianity and about being willing to accept how our communities may or may not have ignored the threat of this for a long time. And also inside our own communities, the possibilities about where we have lost the thread of what it means to be the church in the world. And I think that's the thing too, is that we need to reclaim the narrative by reclaiming the church itself, reclaiming what it means to be the church. I said this in many a space that a few years ago, that a very prominent evangelical pastor was on National Public Radio, in which he said that amongst his colleagues that were in the evangelical Christian space, that the idea that the Sermon on the Mount was now too quote unquote woke for many Christians has become a serious problem. And what does that mean? It means that we need to actually get serious about our scriptural narratives. It needs to be clear that we understand what is the role of scripture and practice and our theology in our church, and that we need to reclaim that theology and reclaim that narrative, and do some hard work about maybe how we've maybe drifted from that. And that leads toward a third piece, and that is that within our current standing, we need to interrogate our historic and present role in our society. One of the things that I have heard over and over again is the idea that Christian nationalism, or Christian supremacy kind of came out of nowhere. And if we look from our historical lens, Christianity has been at the center point of many, many, many aspects of our anti-immigrant our anti-immigrant moments in our history. It has been at the forefront of some of our issues around Islamophobia, around anti-Semitism, our roles around race climates, our role of women in society, and social identity issues. And I think once we start to have those hard conversations inside our communities, as well as being willing to name them when we are out in community, we might see people that start to say, wow, maybe this is a different kind of congregation that's willing to have some of those hard conversations, because this is why I don't come to church. This is why I don't participate, etc., etc. And so once we interrogate that and we can play and we can be more honest with ourselves, I think we might be able to see people be more interested in seeing us as part of the solution rather than as part of the problem that so many, I think, have found. So, how do we flip the script moving forward? Well, we build bridges to community by doing all of these things. We stop the idea that people are here to come to us, and we start the idea of actually going out, which means that we rebuild our parking lot proverbially and our churches inside and out. That requires us to interrogate ourselves, our culture of the church, and the culture of the life of the church, who we welcome when they show up to church, what that means when someone is new and shows up, how do we invite them, what is our overall feeling about what they should be doing if they show up because they're coming to an after school program with their kids. If the first thing that we do is you should come to Sunday morning church, my response is you're actually you need to interrogate the culture of what you mean by that, because what you're doing is you're putting some sort of an idea that going to church is the only way or the best way or the way in which, like, real Christians, if you will, are showing up. And so once we interrogate ourselves, we can flip the script, go out into community, build those bridges, and be the church out in the community. And that also includes the chance for us to claim our space in the community. If people in our communities only see the church down the street as being a place where Christians go or where you go for Sunday worship, and not a space where people come to organize or people come to eat together or people come to have hard conversations together, then the church will continue to be in a state of decline, both imminently, rapidly, and continually until we move through the future. And that will lead toward many of our congregations closing and much less of the impact of the church in a lot of spaces, including but not limited to our local and rural more communities in places like Wisconsin. So I think the opportunity there is for us to flip the whole idea, to go out in the community, to listen more, and at the same time to do a lot of self-interrogative work about what it means to be the church, and also to focus our energies, our capacities, and to be a part of a collective set of congregations and communities, and even like civic partners and nonprofits that are out there. So I know this feels somewhat remedial at times, but I often say this is a conversation to help spur people to think more and to open up this. And so, what I will say is that now it's an opportunity to open up for some conversation and to see what you're thinking. And I know some of you that might be on those webinars just listening in today, what I will say to you is, I would love to be able to connect with you all afterward. I'm just going to flash for a second my contact information because I know that for those of you listening on the webinar, this is the end of the time with me, at least now. This is my contact information. I would love to talk with you and love to sort of hear more about your experience, and more about what you have had going on in your communities and how I can support you. But for those of you here on the live portion, this is time for Q&A, and I'm going to turn off my slide deck and see what anyone is thinking.
Hi,
Thank you.
can I talk now?
Please.
Oh, no, okay.
Yes, Dennis.
Yeah, hey, Cody. Hey, would you give me some specifics about listening to the community? Our community is pretty diffuse.
Yeah.
It doesn't get together a lot. It does some. It has an association. People don't necessarily know each other real well.
Yeah.
How do we listen to a community in a way that produces information that we can then use to decide whether to have a food pantry or to have an after school program? How do we go there?
Yeah. I mean, here's what I will say. I start at the basics. I really do. I think that if you feel like the community is really diffuse, if you're not really having like conversations with each other, then the intentional opportunity there to just have a dinner or just have a sort of conversation table that has questions on it, for people to have and maybe some folks to take some notes is a really good first step. What do you hear in those conversations? And again, I would say this is an opportunity for your congregation members to go out in the community to set them up with some like, I want you, or, during the month of January, while you're out on your day to day, what ask your congregation like three questions to be thinking about. What are you hearing from folks? What are you seeing? And what are they experiencing? And so maybe they're having a conversation with their neighbors. What are their neighbors talking about? Or when you're at the grocery store, what are they seeing? Or maybe they're at some rec sports thing or their kids in like basketball, what are they experiencing? And what I do is I help people to be prepared to have that ability to see. A lot of us have this tendency where we just go throughout our days and we don't pay a lot of attention to anyone else and what else is happening. And I think actually giving people a chance to say, I want you to pay more attention offers a lot of insights. And then they come back and then you share those things. But inside the congregation, if they are diffuse, but also you just have members of the congregation that you want to get more information about, I would host a dinner or a luncheon or a tea or everybody brings a dessert, and I would do table conversations with with somebody to keep notes, and I would just do an hour of listening with each other and mix people up, send them to different tables. Like there's a couple of table exercises I could send you, Dennis, where people ask a question and then they do this like rotational model and they have the conversations and go deeper and deeper and deeper, and a lot of information comes out.
So I just want to clarify that we're an urban church, right? And so
Right.
most of the people drive into that parking lot that you were talking about. They don't
Yep.
come from the community, so they're not talking with the community. One of
Yeah.
the ways that we're approaching that is that we're trying to take advantage of an association that exists, a neighborhood association, and trying to find ways to get involved, to listen, to get into their email
Yeah.
list, and just see what's going on, and then try to decide what being a good neighbor means
Yeah.
in that association.
No, I think that's great. And definitely, I think that what being in an urban church in Madison gives you a different kind of lens. So I think it's an opportunity. You and I can talk afterward if you want. Like we can set up a time to talk. And like we can talk about some of the ways in which urban communities have a little bit of a different way to do it. Because obviously, if you're in Eau Claire, Wisconsin, or Madison, Wisconsin, you have a different experience than if you're in, I don't know, name a small town in Wisconsin, Jonas. So I grew up in Iowa. There's so many small towns in Iowa that I can name. But no, that's good. Um, I appreciate your question. Ginny, you joined in the middle of this conversation, and I know you're around, but I'd love to hear if you have any thoughts or anything that I can do to be supportive, based on what you had a chance to hear in this session. Oh, all right. Maybe Ginny doesn't have anything to add to this. Oh, maybe you do. Here we go.
Okay.
Hey,
I am
Ginny.
not very tech savvy.
Don't worry.
No, I think that there's a lot of solid points that you made that I think have been around our congregation about what's our motivation. Is it to bring people in or is it to serve people?
Yeah.
And I think that that's difficult for us, especially we have a aging population in our congregation. We're in a rural community. So it does present some challenges because we don't have the same type of outreach. You have to drive to get to our location. So when it comes to serving different groups like poverty and all that, we're again going into the community and trying to go to those organizations that are doing a good job and already have the system. So I think we're doing a lot of things well that way.
Yeah.
I think that it's interesting, though, you talk about opening up for conversations, and we're, in theory, it is, seems like it should be a safe place to do that.
Yeah.
But it is such a challenge, and I just think that that is probably one of the biggest struggles is how to respectfully disagree and
Yeah.
have that conversation.
Yeah, no, and I think that's the hard part is we are not very well trained on discursive conversations. We're not good at, there's a lot of work around restorative justice that I do. We're not trained on what we call emotional regulation. So it's that moment where, you and I get into something and all of a sudden we're fighting and all of a sudden I've shut down and I'm not listening to anything you have to say. And I will say there definitely probably need to be guardrails and parameters on which we talk about. When I do facilitations with communities and congregations, one of the things I say is I'm not here to permit conversations that move toward a dehumanization of other folks. Like that's just one of the things that I put as a line in the sand. And I am also happy to call that out because harm naming is critically important to one, reduce harm as the future goes on, and also to restore communities together after harm has been done. But we're really bad at this. What we basically end up doing, and this is an interesting thing with, both of you in the space, I find that clergy tell me all the time that they're like, I can't say this thing or my members of my congregation will leave. And my response is, these are the most important things for us to work with congregations and communities around because you don't get to have the ability in our society unless you want to be perpetually single unless you want to be perpetually like only in a silo to only be in spaces where your opinion and your belief are the only thing that you ever hear. And unfortunately, for a lot of clergy, what happens is that if I tell something that's compelling, or I might tell some, some realities that people have to live by or should live by based on the gospel message alone, clergy tell me all the time, they're like, well, those congregational members, they'll stop giving money, they'll leave, they'll go to the church down the street. And my response is, we should not be having that, but we can't fix that just by saying to the clergy, you just need to speak your truth. We have to do some hard work with congregation members to help them stay in the hard conversations. And that's not an easy thing. But it is also why so many of the folks that are no longer attending the church have chosen not to attend, because there are certain messages that perhaps need to be said that have not been said. And at a certain point, people will just simply say, this pastor, this church will not go and have the hard conversations that need to happen. So, as you can probably imagine, it's a balancing act, but also, I would say, we can do a lot of interpersonal work in this moment. And that starts within our congregations, but it also becomes about building a sort of like flip script of going to outreach and listening and hearing from folks who feel like they have been estranged from their communities because of the fact that things haven't been able to be had in hard conversations.
Great. Dennis or Ginny, any last comments or
Well,
questions?
looking to resources, you had asked about how you can support or what we'd be looking for. And I think that what you're talking about there, about having those conversations and support of how to do that in a safe environment. And not everybody, we're not professionals in that area.
Yeah.
But how to do that, because it does need, when you look to our congregation members that no longer go, or former congregation members that no longer go here, it is never just because this place is, we moved or whatever. It's always, there was something uncomfortable for them, whether it be with, a certain message that was said, without the explanations or an interaction with another parishioner. But I think that just that those general skills are what we need to help people with and kind of grow with. So I guess any resources around that are always welcome.
Let me send some stuff your way, because I do
Okay.
think there's some good stuff. And what I'll say is, Jonna, if you can share Ginny's contact information with me afterward, I think there's some opportunities out there. But yeah, I mean, like, it's not easy. There's a lot of work to be done, and it's going to take time and energy. And I mean, even when we're professionals, a lot of times we're not professionals. How's that? So.
I was going to this final comment. One of the things that I think that we would like to do more in our church is to figure out how to involve the community in our decision-making process.
Yeah.
So that we can engage in conversations.
Yeah. I think that is the kind of stuff that really is going to flip heads, is especially if you're forming coalitions and coalitions, committees, and sort of task forces that include people that are not maybe part of your regular worshiping community. Like, that's the kind of stuff where the church has its opportunity to be a part of the community itself, and to be a base through which, a base of operations for some of the big stuff that's going on. So, and especially, Dennis, I think when you're in an urban setting, there's there's a high repudiation of like how that can possibly take place, because you usually have a coalition of congregations around. I can tell you story after story of my times here in the Twin Cities, and my times in Boston, and my times when I was in seminary in Washington, D.C., when the faith communities were like the powerhouses of like organizing and things like this. But yeah, like having those coalitions of people that are like, I don't go to church here, and you're like, yeah, but we'd like your opinion, your thoughts, and your feelings about like how do we do things in our community, can be really a really powerful expression.
Great.
Right.
Well, thank you, everyone. And I will make those connections after we end this call, this webinar. And thank you, Cody, for your insight and your time. And everyone stay safe and stay warm.
Yes, stay safe. All right, thanks everybody. It's good to talk to you all. Good to have you today.